Eleanor Price never believed in curses, but the night she and her younger brother Daniel moved into the farmhouse at the edge of town, she felt it watching them. The windows were black mirrors, reflecting nothing but their uneasy faces, and the silence inside seemed to thick like the house had been holding its breath, waiting for someone new to arrive. Daniel laughed it off, eager for adventure, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't the first ones to walk these halls, just the latest to be invited in. The first time I walked into the apartment, I should have trusted the warning that gnawed at me in silence. Nothing looked unusual at first glance. The cream walls were bland, the carpet smelled faintly of dust, and the windows rattled from a wind that wasn't even strong, but beneath all of it was something I couldn't put into words. The air carried a heaviness, like standing in a room where someone had just whispered and I had arrived a second too late to hear it. My skin prickled, but I forced myself to push the feeling aside. Moving into a new place was stressful enough without letting my imagination get the better of me. I unpacked the essentials that night. Clothes stacked sloppily in drawers, plates piled into cabinets, and my mattress thrown on the floor until I had time to buy a proper frame. As I walked from one room to the next, I noticed shadows clinging stubbornly to corners even with the ceiling lights blazing. They weren't sharp shadows, not like the neat ones cast by furniture. These were darker, thicker, almost like stains that refused to lift, no matter how brightly the room shone. I muttered to myself that I was just tired. It was late, and exhaustion makes everything strange. By the time I climbed into bed, the silence was unbearable. I could hear the refrigerator hum through the walls, the occasional click of pipes, and then, beneath it all, a stillness that felt alive. I lay flat on my back, staring into the ceiling's blank face, telling myself over and over that I was safe. The more I repeated it, the less I believed it. Eventually I pulled the blanket over my head, trying to bury myself in warmth, but that didn't help. The moment I hid beneath the covers, the air seemed to shift. The sound came first a faint dragging, like something sharp moving across plaster. It started high, near the far wall, then crept slowly across the surface, closer to where my bed sat. Each scrape was deliberate, like fingers drawing lines with patience. My breath locked in my throat. I tried not to move, terrified of confirming what I already feared. Maybe it was the building settling. Maybe it was mice or rats, I told myself. But deep down I knew the sound didn't belong to anything ordinary. It was too controlled, too purposeful. The noise grew louder, dragging its way toward me. I couldn't stay hidden under the blanket forever. Sweat built at the back of my neck, and I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. Slowly, with trembling hands, I lowered the blanket and forced my eyes to adjust to the dim glow of the streetlight seeping through the curtains. What I saw made my body lock into stillness. On the ceiling above me stretched a shadow that didn't belong to any furniture or trick of light. It was shaped like a figure, long-limbed, stretched unnaturally as if gravity had no control over it. The limbs bent wrong, crooked like broken sticks, and it clung upside down as though the ceiling were its floor. The worst part wasn't its shape but its motion. It moved, crawling slowly along the plaster with deliberate grace, its arms and legs extended in jerking motions, reaching closer with every shift. I lay frozen beneath it, paralyzed by the certainty that if I moved, it would know. Its head twisted unnaturally, tilting until I could feel its gaze burning into me. Though it had no clear face, the darkness where eyes should have been seemed to pierce straight through the blanket of silence. My lungs screamed for air, and a shiver rippled across my body, but I forced myself to stay still. For what felt like an eternity, it clung there, poised above me, its limbs stretching lower with each scrape. The shadow filled the ceiling like a stain spreading across water, impossible to outrun or ignore. Just as I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, the lights flickered from somewhere down the hall, and in the blink of that moment, it was gone. I sat up, gasping, my chest aching with the effort of holding still for so long. The ceiling was blank again, white and unremarkable, but the silence that followed was worse than the noise, because in the corner of the room, faint but undeniable, were fresh gouges etched into the wall just above my headboard, long jagged marks, as if something had been trying to claw its way closer while I slept. I didn't dare touch them. I just stared, knowing deep down that whatever had been in the room wasn't finished with me. The night wasn't over, it had only just begun. I didn't sleep after that first night. How could I, with the memory of that thing crawling across the ceiling etched into my mind? I sat upright until the sun finally bled into the sky, waiting for the world to remind me that everything still made sense. The daylight gave me false courage, convincing me that maybe exhaustion had warped my senses, that maybe I had dreamed the scratches into existence. But when I looked again, the gouges were still there, deep and fresh in the plaster, too real to dismiss. I told myself that work would distract me. I showered, dressed, and forced myself out the door, but the weight didn't lift. Even walking the crowded street, surrounded by people who laughed, shouted, and carried on with their lives, I felt watched. Every reflective surface windows, bus stop shelters, the glass door at the office caught my eye, because I was half expecting to see something standing too close, lingering where it shouldn't be. My thoughts tangled around the fear, making the hours crawl by. By evening, I dreaded going back to the apartment. The logical part of me knew there was nowhere else to go. I couldn't afford to abandon the lease after only one night. I convinced myself that I needed evidence, something that would let me understand if I was losing my mind or if something truly unnatural had taken root in that place. That's why I set up my phone on the dresser before bed, propped at an angle where it could see the entire room. I told myself it was just to calm my nerves, just a way to prove that I'd exaggerated everything. The night stretched long. I tossed and turned, drifting in and out of uneasy sleep, every creak of the floor and distant car horn jolting me awake. I woke for the last time around dawn, my throat dry, my body aching from tension. With shaky hands, I picked up my phone and pressed play. At first, the recording showed nothing unusual, just me shifting restlessly, kicking off the blanket, then pulling it back up. The quiet static of the microphone filled the room with white noise, but at 3:07 a.m. the video changed. In the corner of the screen, the darkness thickened. It wasn't a trick of the lens or a shadow cast by furniture. It was too solid, too defined. A tall figure stood in the corner by the closet door, rigid, motionless. Its form was darker than the rest of the room, and though no details were clear, I could feel where its head angled toward me, toward my sleeping body. I wanted to stop watching. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I couldn't look away. The figure never moved from its spot, not for minutes, not for hours. It just stood there, as though waiting. Then, at 3:59 a.m., it shifted. Not much, not a step, but its head tilted. Slowly, unnaturally. The angle of it grew sharper, almost like a curious dog listening to something far away. Only it wasn't far away, it was listening to me. My breaths, my heartbeat, my restless turning under the blanket. My chest tightened as the figure leaned forward, almost imperceptibly at first. Then it lowered itself, bending out of the frame with a strange, stiff motion. The camera couldn't follow it, but I knew exactly where it had gone, crouched low beside my bed, inches from where my head lay. The video cut out soon after, the battery dead. I sat frozen on the edge of the mattress, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. The room around me felt poisoned, heavy with the residue of something that had been there long after I closed my eyes. I turned toward the corner where the figure had stood. Nothing was there, just shadows, furniture, and an empty closet door. Yet when I looked closer, I saw the carpet fibers disturbed, pressed down in the unmistakable shape of two footprints. They weren't mine. They were angled outward, as though something had been standing perfectly still, watching me for hours. The daylight didn't feel safe anymore. It didn't matter if the sun was out or the lights were on. The truth had followed me from the screen, seared into my thoughts. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't dreaming. Something had been in the room with me, standing there the entire night, waiting for me to sleep, and I had slept. I had given it exactly what it wanted. I stopped pretending I could manage it alone. The days bled into one another, a dull smear of work, errands, and the constant itch of unease under my skin. I told myself I would not let it control me. I would not give it the satisfaction, but the truth was smaller and meaner. I was tired in a way that swallowed logic. My appetite shrank. I watched the clock until the numbers blurred. At night, every noise felt like a promise of return. I tried to change the space. I moved the bed against a different wall, bought thicker curtains to cut the street light, and even scattered little objects on the dresser to break the clean lines of shadow. For a few nights those changes seemed to help. The apartment did not feel like it belonged to someone else. Not completely, but the relief was temporary, like a sleeping pill. The presence waited. It studied my patterns and learned how to fit around me. It learned where I kept my toothbrush and the rhythm of my breathing. The breathing started soon after, not the simple rise and fall of a living body, but a sound that pressed against the room like cold fog. It matched the pattern of my own breaths with cruel accuracy and echo that arrived a hair behind me, as if something were always 3 steps away. I would lie awake and listen to it slow, then quicken, mimicking my panic, then slow again. Sometimes it sounded like held laughter underwater. Other times it sounded like someone trying to keep from crying. The nights where I thought I might finally sleep were the worst. I learned to dread the slick weight that moved across my limbs. It began as a pressure, gentle enough at first to mistake for my own movement. Then the weight would gather, settling firmly, like a hand pressing down until the blood in my fingers felt distant. One night it pressed down so hard across my chest that the world narrowed to a pinprick of light behind my eyes. My lungs hammered. I tried to claw my way free, but my arms were pinned as if by magnets. The pressure loosened as suddenly as it had come, and I sat upright, hair soaked with sweat, gasping air that tasted of metal. After that night I barely slept at all. I kept the lamp on and the television playing low static as a kind of ticker, noise that said I was not alone, but at least the company was ordinary. I moved the phone camera back onto the dresser, reluctant to stare at the footage but needing proof, as if proof could change anything. The battery died again and again, the camera cutting out exactly when the room shifted into something else. Each failure felt deliberate. One morning I woke to a cold nose of air along my ankles. I glanced down and saw marks on the carpet I had not noticed before. Not shoe prints, not even the footprint of bare skin. These were depressions like long fingers had walked across the pile, pressing in deeply, then lifting. They curled and arced in a half circle around the bed, stopping where my head had been. The pattern made no sense. It suggested movement and intent, the trace of something pacing and then pausing, listening. I followed the marks with a trembling hand. They led to the nightstand and then continued, faint but sure, toward the pillow. I braced myself like you brace for a cold wind, expecting a stain, a scrap of cloth, anything to explain the fear. My fingers brushed the pillowcase and the fabric felt strangely slick, as if someone had breathed on it for hours. I pulled it back. The thing that lay there was small and clean, incongruously banal and utterly obscene against the white cotton. It was the size of a fingernail, pale and hard, with a root like a hook. I knew what it was the instant my skin went numb. A tooth, not mine, not animal, human. I had no memory of losing a tooth. I had no knowledge of whose it could be. Its surface was wet with a faint smear of dark that might have been blood or might have been shadow. It sat on the pillow where my head had rested, inches from where my ear had been pressed into the fabric, and a single strand of hair lay looped around it, my hair unmistakably the same. Thin dark filament I found often tangled at the comb's teeth. I held it between my thumb and forefinger and felt the room tilt. The breath behind me sharpened into a smile I could not see. I couldn't take another night in that apartment. The walls felt like they were closing in. The air thick with something unseen that pressed against my skin and crawled into my lungs. I packed a bag without thinking, barely folding clothes, just stuffing them into whatever I could carry. My plan was simple. Leave. Find anywhere else to sleep, anywhere that wasn't marked with gouges in the plaster or footprints circling my bed. I checked into a small motel at the edge of town, the kind of place people passed without noticing. The neon sign buzzed weakly, half the letters burned out, leaving only a fractured glow. Inside, the carpet was damp, and the room smelled of mildew and cigarettes that had never really left the walls. It wasn't safe, not in the usual sense, but it was a different kind of unsafe. That was enough. For a while I sat on the bed and convinced myself that distance mattered, that whatever I had brought upon myself would be locked inside the apartment, unable to cross the threshold of this unfamiliar space. I left the television on low, filling the silence with infomercials and static. I tried to believe the noise could drown it out, make it forget me. But as midnight drew closer, the air changed. It started with the smell of faint iron tang, metallic, sharp, like old blood seeping through the carpet. I pressed my hand to my nose, hoping it was just mold or plumbing. But the stink grew stronger until my stomach churned. The bathroom light flickered when I turned it on, glowing weakly before dying completely. The mirror reflected nothing but the faint orange wash from the sign outside. I backed out quickly, unwilling to stare too long in case something else was staring back. I tried to lie still on the bed, eyes closed, pretending sleep would come if I just waited. But then the mattress dipped. At first it was subtle, as though the springs had shifted under my weight. Then it grew heavier, undeniable. The impression was not at my side or at my feet. It was right next to me, as though someone had sat down carefully, deliberately. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I didn't dare move. Every muscle screamed to run, but I lay paralyzed under the weight of not knowing what I would see if I opened my eyes. Then I felt the brush of fingers through my hair, cold, deliberate, combing slowly as if trying to soothe me. The touch was impossibly light but unmistakably real. I snapped my eyes open before I could stop myself. The room was dim, lit only by the faint orange glow bleeding through the curtains. But across from the bed stood the black screen of the television. It wasn't turned off completely. The standby light glowed red in the corner. The screen itself reflected me lying stiff in the bed, but the reflection wasn't right. The figure in the television didn't look like me. Its eyes were hollowed, dark pits stretched too wide, and its jaw hung slack, unhinged in a way no human bone should allow. The mouth opened further and further until it seemed like the whole head might split in half, and the reflections had my hand-stroked hair that wasn't visible in the real world. I blinked hard, my chest tightening, hoping it was a trick of exhaustion. But the reflection moved on its own, lagging a second behind, smiling when I was not smiling. It leaned forward in the glass until its face pressed against the inside of the screen, grinning so wide it looked ready to crawl out. I turned away, my body trembling so violently the bed frame shook. But the mattress shifted again, heavier this time, as if the unseen figure had stretched out beside me. The smell of iron thickened, filling my nose and throat until I gagged. I pulled the blanket over my face, knowing it wouldn't protect me, but I couldn't bear to look again. The television buzzed faintly behind me, though I hadn't touched the remote. The static grew louder, almost like whispering, rising and falling in rhythm with the ragged breath at my ear. When I finally forced myself to peek out, the screen was black again, but in the reflection of the glass, the bed was no longer empty. Something long and pale was lying beside me, its body twisted as though every bone had been broken and reassembled wrong. Its head was turned toward mine, mouth still open in that awful grin, and though it wasn't moving, the blankets around me shifted with every breath it took. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. All I could do was close my eyes again and wait, knowing it had followed me here, and distance had never mattered at all. I walked back into the apartment like someone returning to a crime scene, the hallway light buzzing above me with a tired, indifferent hum. The lock clicked behind me and the sound felt too loud, like the final beat before something begins. Up close, the gouges above the headboard looked deeper, fresher white plaster exposed where the paint had broken away. My name was carved there again, over and over, the letters leaning into each other like they were trying to crawl out of the wall. Each repetition was sloppier than the last, as if whoever had been writing had grown frantic, exhausted, or hungry. The air hit me first, colder than it should have been, wet with the faint iron tang I had smelled at the motel. It moved through the room like a presence testing its edges, and I realized how long I had been holding my breath. The apartment felt smaller, as though the walls had inched inward while I was gone, tightening like a fist. My hands shook, but I forced myself to move slowly, to touch nothing without thinking. The bed sagged where I'd slept, but otherwise everything was where I had left it, except the dresser. The photos that used to stand there were gone. Empty frames stared back at me with dull glass eyes. I flicked on the lamp. The light threw shadows that shivered along the corners, and for a second I was so tired I thought relief had come with illumination. Then the lamp dimmed and the room shifted back into the kind of darkness that ate at the edges of things. I kept my phone in my hand like a talisman, the screen a pale rectangle I could stare into and pretend was a window to proof and reason. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the room like a person watches an animal they think might bolt. My fingers dug into the quilt. The breathing in the apartment matched my own now, but delayed, as if someone were listening to me and echoing me with a cruel lag. The pause between breaths stretched and snapped and stretched again, and every time it fell slightly behind, my skin crawled. Something moved on top of the dresser, a tiny, deliberate shift that made me jump. I turned slowly and found the phone I had left recording months ago, the screen black, a thin smear of dust across its glass. My stomach dropped because I knew, stupidly and certainly, that I had not put it there. The camera had been dead when I last left. The battery had given out before whatever it was could complete its work. Someone or something had taken the trouble to move it. I swiped to wake it and the gallery opened. Hundreds of files, not videos, just images. Thumbnails flickered. The corner of my bedroom at odd angles, fingers pressing into carpet, the ceiling from strange perspectives. My pulse raced as I thumbed through until the tiny rectangles blurred into a smear of black and white. Near the end, a new image appeared, time-stamped only minutes earlier. I hadn't been here minutes earlier. The photo showed me sleeping, mouth slack, hair spread on the pillow only. It was wrong. My face was there, but the eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling with a calm that made my skin crawl. The eyes in that picture did not belong to the tired, frantic person I felt under my own skin. They looked patient, they looked pleased. I pressed more images. A sequence showed someone leaning over the bed. The hand in the photo was mine. The angle, the curve of the knuckles were familiar, but the hand in the pictures moved like someone who had been careful, who knew how to keep their touch quiet. In the last frame, the hand was holding a small white object close to my cheek. I tapped to zoom. It was a tooth. My breath died. A sound like a soft scrape came from behind me. I turned and the mirror on the closet door reflected me sitting on the bed, my shoulders slumped, my face pale. Behind that reflection, the room was empty, but the reflection smiled. I had not smiled. My lips stiffened in the mirror, but my face felt blank. The reflection's smile widened as if it had all the time in the world, patient and endless. Its eyes, when I looked, slid toward the wall above the headboard. In the glass, the carved letters of my name were fresh and wet, the plaster dark at the edges. A wetness pooled along one of the grooves and, in the reflection, something dripped from an unseen place onto the floor. My hand moved before I could stop it. It reached for the pen I kept in the mug on the dresser, the habit of someone who wrote lists, not confessions. The pen felt heavier than it should have. It tipped cold against my fingers. I pressed it against the wall beside the carved names and the point sliced the paint. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, slow as a tide, my hand began to write, not in my shaky, cramped script, but with a sure, almost elegant stroke I didn't recognize. The letters formed of their own accord, and as they did, the breath that had followed me for so long filled the room like a chorus. It wrote, "Thank you for letting me in." The words were not mine. My fingers were the instrument, obedient and traitorous, moving with a will that was not mine. I tried to yank the pen away and my muscles burned with resistance. The reflection smiled wider and I felt something warm and proud settle behind my ribs, a feeling that was almost relief. I could hear, faintly, the sound of other rooms, waking doors in the building creaking, a dog barking somewhere far away. The city lived on, ordinary and blind. In this small apartment, a different life was beginning. My throat closed as whatever sat inside me, patient and glad, finished the sentence in a voice that was impossibly like mine and not mine at all. On the bed beside me, where my head had rested, something small and white caught the lamp's thin light. It lay on the pillow like an offering. It was a tooth, too clean for the dark and too familiar for comfort. I had never lost it. I had never given it. My hand kept writing.